If you have a Mercedes W163 M-Class like this ML500 and you want to install a doubled-in radio, especially if you have the Bose Amplifier, this is the video for you. I'll be covering wiring, fitting the radio, running the USB cable into the center console, installing the microphone, and some tips on running the backup camera while keeping the wires hidden. Before we get started, just be aware that there's a couple steps in this process that aren't really reversible, so you got to be sure that this is what you want to do. So to remove the radio, you can either need the removal keys that come with the car, or buy a set, or if you're like me and you don't have any, you can make your own. And this is how you do it. So to make your removal tool, you're going to start with a credit card, and you're going to cut it in half. Once it's cut in half, you're going to make another cut to make the width 9 millimeters, and you want to make sure that section is 60 millimeters long so that it'll fit into the radio. Then you're just going to leave a little tab to grab onto. And then your final cut is going to be to round the end and then have a little notch in it about 15 millimeters in. And that's the removal tool. And you use it with the notch facing towards the inside. So once you have your tool clicked in, you can pull both of them forward and it'll pull the radio out. Then you can start disconnecting everything that's plugged in the bag. So the first connector has a little tab on the side that you can push and then pull the connector out. And then your main connectors are in the bottom corner, with one tab for the top connector and two tabs for the bottom one. And then the last ones are the antenna connector and the fiber optics connector. And that's the radio removal. To access the wiring we need for the radio install, we need to remove the kick plate. And to do that, there's 4 screws. 2 Phillips head screws, and 2 plastic screws, which you'll need to use a large flathead for. With the screws removed, you can pull the kick plate down and access the top of the OBD2 connector. Here you can see I unscrewed the OBD2 port, but you don't actually need to do that. I just wasn't sure how to disconnect it beforehand. The OBD2 port has a latch that you can pull over to the right, and that'll let you pull the connector out. And with that done, you can take out the kick panel. So to get to the amp behind the dash, you can follow the brake pedal up. If you pull back this phone, you can see the rich box right here, and that's the amplifier. A good way to work in here is to have a stool outside the car that you can sit on and then lay back into the footwell. Now behind this piece of foam, there's a 10mm bolt, and that's the one we'll need to remove to access the amp. The speaker wire harness coming off the amp is connected to a bracket right here with a trim clip. So you're going to have to use a tool to pop that out. And once the clip is out, you can start moving the amp. So the way I did it was to push it upwards and then start rotating it. Right here, you can't see it, but it's actually catching on a harness on the left, so look out for that. With a little bit of work, I was actually able to move it to the right side of the brake pedal, which gave me a little bit better access to the connector. The connector pivots up and out, and then if you pivot it further back off the amp, it'll come off altogether. And with the amp out of the way, you can move the connectors to the right of the steering column to get better access, and you'll have the fiber optic connector and the main harness, which you'll be needing to use to access the loom right here. To connect the head unit to the speaker harness, we're going to run speed wire down through the dash, so you can push it down through the back and then grab it from the bottom near the footwell, and then you'll be able to bring it through up to the loom. So on this connector, you'll notice that what would be the audio connections on the harness adapter you get, the audio connections don't actually connect to anything. And that's because of the digital, or the fiber optic connection that the Bose amp uses. So we're actually going to have to bypass that. So in the radio's harness, we'll be wiring into the speed wire, which has these connections. So front, left, right, rear, left, right. And those will go directly into the loom that comes off, that came off the amp. That's why we brought the speed wire down here, and we're going to tuck that away once it's all connected. So because all these audio connections aren't used to clean up the install, we're going to deepen these 8 wires, and that'll just clean up what connects to the radio harness, so there's less loose wires back here. To access the wires in the connector, you have to cut this zip tie, which will let you open up the cover and access the wires. And once the zip tie is cut, you can pivot the cover out of the way. Then our next step is to make the connections to the radio. So now that you have access to your connector, it's important to know what you're looking at with the pins. In the connector, there are 6 pairs of pins that you're going to use to control the speakers. From left to right, there's the rear right, rear tweeters, rear left speaker, front right, front left, and then the subwoofer. The top row is all positive speaker connections, and the middle row is all the negative speaker connections. So these are the colors of the wires you're going to see coming for each speaker. And whether you depin or cut the wires at the connector, I really recommend doing one at a time and labeling them so that you don't have any chance of mixing things up. Now, because the head unit I used only has 4 outputs for front left, front right, rear left, and rear right, and there are 6 pairs of wires to go to the speakers in this car, I decided to connect the rear right to the rear tweeter in series and the rear left speaker to the subwoofer in series. And doing this also takes care of impedance mismatch, which would be an issue because you'd have a lower impedance than what the amp is rated for. Since I wasn't able to depin the connector, I ended up cutting the wires, and here you can see them all labeled. And one thing you can notice is that the pairs of wires that go to each speaker are twisted together, so that can help you keep them lined up and paired up correctly. So here you can see all the butt connectors connected to all the speaker wires, and you can notice that the subwoofer wires are using a different butt connector, and that's because they're a thicker gauge. And with the butt connectors in place, the next step is to connect them to the speed wire. and this is all the connections completed. With the black wires you can see looping between the rear right and tweeters and rear left and subwoofer, just like in the diagram I showed earlier. So once you're done the wiring in the footwell, connect the speed wires to the head unit wiring for all the audio, and then connect the head unit harness to the adapter. So it's switch 12 volt, the dimmer, the continuous 12 volt, and the ground. And then just plug it into the car. While we're connecting things to the back of the radio, it's a good time to connect the microphone. So you can run it inside the headliner up to the corner, and then inside the trim, and bring it down inside the weather stripping. So you can just tuck it in. And then once you reach the bottom of the dashboard, you can run it inside and it'll be behind the kick panel, and you can bring it up to the head unit. So you can use a trim tool to push the wire in, and then once you get to the bottom you can pull it through, and then you can tuck it behind the tabs to keep it out of the way while you're working. Now let's take care of the center console wiring. To remove the center console, there's 2 screws and 2 pins that you have to start by removing. For the pins at the bottom, you want to push them out, push the center part down with a screwdriver, and after that you can pull them out. Once the pins are pushed down, you can pry them up with a little plastic tool or your fingers, and this is what they look like before you push the pin down. To remove the armrest, you can use a trim tool to push 2 tabs in once you've removed the screws, and the armrest will lift up and you'll have to angle it out. And with the armrest removed, you can just pull up the container and put it out of the way. To get access below the center console, you have 2 torx screws to remove, and then you have to pry off the bezel around the shifter. With the screws and the bezel removed, you can lift up the center console panel, and you can either remove it by disconnecting the connector down there, or what I did was move the shifter out of park and then back into park when it's up and out of the way. The best way to run your USB extension to the dashboard is alongside the cup holder. So to run it in there, you can push it along the inside of the center console, and you can grab it in front of the cup holder, and then you're going to want to run it underneath the bracket that's right here. Once you're past the bracket, you can pull the cable through, and then you can take the connector, and to get it under the bottom, you can push it through the side of the center console, and then you can pull it forward, and once you get to the front, it won't be pinched anymore, and you can pull it up through alongside the speed wire and the microphone cable. The last step before reassembling the center console is to drill a hole for the USB extension to fit into the center storage bin. So I started by drilling 2 holes, and then checking to see how much more I'd need to Dremel out. And with a little bit Dremeled away, I was able to just fit the cable in. To reinstall the center console panel, you have 2 clips in the front, and the 2 screws in the back. And then you reinstall the shifter bezel and just push it down once it's lined up, and it'll snap in. When you're putting the storage container back in, make sure the USB cable is out of the way so that it sits flush. And we're going to reinstall the pins at the bottom. So you're going to want to push the pin back out from the clip. and then you can line it up. And then do the same thing for the other one. And then you can just push the pins in and secure the container. And then we grab the armrest, and we're going to line up the tabs and the slots, and then you have to angle it a little bit before tilting it back, and then it snaps in. And then all you have to do is screw it back in. Now to reinstall the kick panel, you want to start by lining it up and making sure that you're not pinching any of the cables, like the microphone cable. And then you're going to reconnect the OBD2 port. And as you're lining it up, you want to make sure the tabs line up for the holes, and you want to make sure that on the right, the HVAC port lines up correctly. You're going to screw in your 2 screws that connect to the dash. And then the plastic screws that connect to the floor. And then double check that everything's secure. The final step before finishing the radio install is to install the doubled-in adapter, but you'll notice that it doesn't actually fit, and the top part needs to be filed out. Once that's done and smooth, you can test fit the adapter again. But now we find that the tabs that held the original radio in are in the way. So carefully cut them out. And then smooth them out. And with that done, the adapter should fit snugly and line up just right. To avoid any rattles, I wrapped some of the unused connectors in fabric tape. And I also ended up wrapping the main connector as well. And before installing the radio, you're going to want to mount your adapter hardware, including the tabs that will secure it in place. And this is a good time to check that all the connections work, all the speakers work, before you put it in. Now installing the radio is a tight fit, but this also means it's going to be secure and it's not going to pop out while you're driving. And these 2 slots are where your keys that come with the kit will allow you to pull the radio out. And the finishing touch is to snap in the bezel. So if you ever need to remove the radio, you'll want to remove the bezel using a trim tool and take care not to damage it while you're removing it. And that completes the radio install. And now I'm going to cover some tips on installing the backup camera. To install the backup camera, I started by drilling a hole behind the license plate. Make sure the hole is large enough to pass the connector through, and then insert a grommet, and then use silicone gasket maker to seal it up. Before screwing in the camera, test it with your head unit so that you can orient it properly. So with the trunk drilled for the camera, the next step is getting power to it. You're going to be able to do that by tapping into the tail light, and specifically the reverse light. By using the reverse light, you're ensuring that the camera only powers on when you put the car in reverse. We can also use this to tell the head unit to display the camera when the car is in reverse. On the connector, the gray wire is 12 volt for reverse, and the black wire is ground. Once you've tapped in the wires, you can bring them up along where the weather stripping goes around the trunk. So here you can see I've removed the weather stripping, and I'm going to run the wires up and then onto the trunk lid by tying it off to this cable holder. And then it'll come down inside the trunk panels and through this hole where it'll connect to the camera wiring. And the 12 volt connection will also connect to the video cable that's going to run to the front of the car. And then I wrapped up the connections in fabric tape. Here you can see from the back where the grommet is for the hole that was drilled for the camera. To run the video wire from the trunk, you're going to run it under this piece of trim, and then tuck it into the headliner, and then behind the plastic piece at the C-pillar, and then in the seal at the rear window. You can use a trim tool to do this. Just be careful so you don't damage anything, and make sure everything's tucked in so it looks nice and clean. At the rear window, tuck it into the seal, then into the B-pillar trim, and then for the front window you can remove the seal to make it extra clean, and then you'll bring it down towards the dash, and then just like the microphone wire, you're going to run it underneath the dash and up to the head unit. Once you've run your video cable from the back, you're going to want to connect the signal wire, the red signal wire, to the head unit. So this signal wire is connected to the 12 volt from the reverse light, and it'll connect to, on this radio, the reverse signal wire. And this is what's going to tell the radio to turn on the reverse camera view when you put the car in reverse. To reinstall the trunk trim that goes around the window, there's 6 clips, 2 at the top, and then 2 on either side. The 3 wires that we're tucking in here are the 12 volt and ground from the reverse light, and the video feed that goes from the camera to the front. With the trim in place, the wires fit really nicely at this spot, and you can wrap them up with tape to clean it up. And this is the final product. With the top trim in place, you can pull the wires through and then wrap them up to protect them. And the rest of the trunk trim will cover it up. To reinstall the main trunk panel, you have clips here, 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 and here, which is 10 total. And then on the top, it'll hook in 4 places, right here and right here, and on the other side as well, here and here. And then it'll clip in to the top trim as well on both sides. Something to note is that when you remove the panel, these clips are likely to break, so it'll be good to have spares on hand. These are the 4 tabs that slide in near the window to attach the panel. Now on the other side of the panel, underneath the covers, there's 2 Christmas tree clips. One here, and similarly on the other side, right here. And there are 2 screws in the left container, and then 1 in the right. And then there are also 2 push pin clips, just like in the center console. And those go on the inner corner of both containers. Now to reinstall the back panel, it helps to have a hand. You'll make sure your things are tucked in properly, and then make sure to slide down on the top of the panel before pushing in all the clips around the edges. Then reinstall the third brake light cover, which can pivot in and snap in the corners. The internal trunk latch bezel snaps in, and then there's a little screw that goes back in. And then we can install the screws, which are a torx bit. For the black clips with the push pin, when you remove them, make sure you have your hand there to catch it, otherwise they might go flying. It's also a good idea to maybe have some on hand, just in case. So you just snap in the center part, and then push in the little pin, and that's it. The last step is to reinstall the 2 large Christmas tree clips, but as you can see, they can get damaged when you remove them. So I recommend getting some spares just in case, or finding replacements that are long enough to replace them. If you can't, it's not a huge deal. The panel's still really secure otherwise. And that completes the radio and backup camera install. I hope this helps you out, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll help out the best I can. I've also got an interesting car project coming up, so if you're interested in checking that out, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.